Story 1. I've worked security at Briarwood Downs for 3 months, and the things I've seen out here at night, they ain't normal. The track is glamorous during the day, sure. Rich people, big bets, beautiful horses. But behind the stadium, that's a different world. The stable yard sits on the edge of a forgotten little community where the trainers and stable hands live. They're not the kind of people you'd trust. Some of them are tweakers, strung out on the same drugs they pump into the horses. You learn real quick to keep your head down and mind your business out here at night. And then there was Randy. Randy used to be a great trainer, but drugs and something else had rotted him from the inside out. His eyes were always too wide, too knowing. People whispered about him, that he did weird things out by the stables after hours, that he wasn't right in the head. That night, I was stuck working with Gary. Gary should have never been hired as a security guard. His uniform was a mess. He always had his radio in his hand, and he talked into it like he was in a war movie. Breaker, breaker. This is Ghost Rider. We got movement near stall 6. Over. There was never movement near stall 6. The worst part? Anytime Gary wanted time off, it was the same excuse. Hey, my Uncle Benny just passed. I gotta leave town for the funeral. 2 months later? Yo, I gotta leave. My Uncle Benny just died. Meanwhile, we'd see him riding his bike down Main Street the same night he was supposed to be out of town. But that night, I wished to God he had called off. 2 a.m. to Gary's patrol. Gary had to do the stable patrol. It usually took 45 minutes tops. But when he wasn't back after an hour, I started feeling uneasy. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the cold night air. The smell of hay, manure, and something rotten lingered. The single floodlight above the stable gates flickered, casting long shadows. I clicked my radio. Gary, what's your 20? Static. Then, faintly, I don't want to. Please no. My stomach dropped. I picked up my pace, walking past the empty trailers and rusted-out tack equipment. The horses were shifting uneasily in their stalls. A few of them stomped the ground like they knew something was wrong. Then I heard voices and laughter. Low, sick laughter. I rounded the corner and my flashlight hit Gary. And what I saw? I'll never forget it. Gary was on his knees. His pants were around his ankles. The goat, a small, shaggy thing that belonged to one of the trainers, stood in front of him. Behind Gary, grinning like a devil, was Randy Burke. Randy was whispering in his ear, his bony fingers digging into Gary's shoulders. His eyes were too wide, his face slick with sweat. Yeah, that's it. The goat man needs a vessel. Let him in, Gary. Gary was shaking all over. His eyes were red and full of terror. Please, man, Gary whimpered. I don't want to. Randy let out a long, shuddering breath. His hands trembled as he gripped Gary's shoulders harder. Oh, but you have to, Gary. The goat man needs to be born. You're the chosen one. I stood there, frozen, my stomach churning. Then Randy whispered, "Make the goat man, Gary." Gary sobbed. I took a step forward. What the hell is going on? Randy's head snapped toward me, his grin stretched too wide. You ain't supposed to be here, he slurred. This is sacred. Gary flinched. He made me. He said he'd kill me if I. Shut up, Randy hissed, his whole body shuddering with rage. Before I could react, another voice cut in. Leave him. You don't want to mess with Randy tonight. I turned and saw Tommy Ruiz, one of the younger trainers. His face was pale, eyes darting. Behind him, 2 other stable hands stood, shifting nervously. Tommy shook his head. He's too far gone. Just walk away, man. I clenched my jaw. I'm not leaving Gary. One of the stable hands muttered. Shit, man. Randy's been cutting up animals out here for months. Just let him do his crazy shit and leave before he turns on you. Then we all heard it. A low, wet, squelching sound. My eyes snapped back to Gary. Randy's fingers dug into his skin, his face inches from Gary's. He was panting. The goat man sees you, Gary, Randy whispered. He sees inside you. Gary was shaking uncontrollably. That was it. I snapped. Get the hell off him, I yelled, reaching for my baton. That's when Randy lunged at me. He hit me hard, knocking me into a pile of wooden pallets. My head smacked the ground, stars exploding in my vision. I heard Gary screaming. I turned over just in time to see Randy pull a knife. A long, curved blade, dripping with something. I fumbled for my radio. 10:33, officer needs assistance. Tommy was already running for the main office. I saw him fumbling for his phone, shouting into it, calling the cops. Randy cackled, his entire body trembling. "The goat man is here. He needs blood." He raised the knife. Red and blue lights flashed through the stable yard. Randy froze. The sheriff's deputies came screeching in, guns drawn. "Drop the knife, now!" For a second, I thought Randy would run. But instead, he just laughed. "You don't understand," he whispered. "The goat man is already here." Then the cops tackled him, slamming him into the dirt. The cops searched the stable yard and found things. Dead animals. Bones. Strange symbols carved into the wood. Some of the officers whispered that Randy had been doing sacrifices for years. I demanded to go to day shift after that. As for Gary, he quit the next day. But he was never the same. Story 2. I'm a 21 years old female. I will never work night shift again due to the story I'm about to tell. I work at a fast food chain in a small town. Let's call it Grady's Burgers. I never wanted to work at Grady's Burgers. It was the kind of place that smelled like old grease and bad decisions. The floors were sticky, the ice machine was always broken, and the night shift? A special kind of misery. But rent doesn't pay itself. That night, it was just me, Richie, and Mel. Richie was the shift lead. Stringy blonde hair, a cigarette always behind his ear. He'd been working here too long and didn't care about anything. Mel was new, skinny, awkward, and always jumpy. The kind of guy who looked like he'd seen a ghost at least once in his life. It was just the three of us. Dead hour, 1:30 a.m. Then the strange man pulled up to the drive-thru. The speaker crackled. I rubbed my tired eyes. "Welcome to Grady's. Can I take your order?" Silence. Then a slow, raspy breath. Something about it made my stomach twist. "I'd like a burger." His voice was off. Too low, too dry. I swallowed. "Would you like fries with that?" More silence. Then, just as slow, "Yes?" I rang it up. "That'll be $6.75. Please pull up to the second window." The car lurched forward. Old. Rusted. The kind of car you see abandoned on the side of the highway. When I saw him, every instinct in my body screamed to shut the window. The man at the window. His skin was gray. Thin. Stretched too tight over sharp bones. His hair was patchy, and his lips were cracked. He looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. But his eyes were the worst part. They were deep but soulless. Like looking into a hole in the ground. And then, I noticed the movement in the back seat. A large black crow perched on the ripped-up back seat, pecking at something. Something red. Something wet. At first, I thought it was a sandwich wrapper. Then I saw a finger. A human finger. The bird ripped off a piece of meat and swallowed it down. I felt my stomach lurch. "Here." The man held out a handful of money. At least, I thought it was money. Until I looked closer. The money that wasn't money. The bills were wrong. They looked normal at first, but when I touched them, the paper was too soft, too damp, like skin. I jerked my hand back. The coins in his other palm? They weren't coins at all. They were teeth, yellowed, old. Some still had bits of gum attached. I stepped back, my heart hammering. The man smiled. And I swear to God, he was missing teeth. Like he had paid me with them. Richie walked up behind me. "Everything good?" I turned to him, eyes wide. "Richie, look." Richie squinted at the money, then frowned. "Dude, what the hell is this?" The man's thin lips curled. "It's money." His voice was too low, too dry. Then the crow in the back seat cawed, and I saw what it was picking apart now. A wave of rotting meat and sweat hit me. I gagged. Richie took a step back. "Yeah, Nope, we're not taking that. The man didn't blink. His dark, empty eyes just stared. Then, in the slowest, driest voice I've ever heard, "Take the money." Mel was watching from the Fryer station. "Dude, just shut the window." But I couldn't move, because something else was moving in the back seat. Not the crow. Something underneath a dirty, blood-stained sheet. Something too big to be an animal. The thing in the back seat. I saw it shift, saw the fabric rise and fall, like breathing. The crow hopped closer, cawing loudly. It pecked at the sheet, pulling it back just a little. I was about to make out a figure. It was dark, something not human. My breath caught in my throat. Richie slammed the window shut. "We're done here." The man didn't move. He just sat there. The crow hopped onto the dashboard, staring at me. Like it knew me. Like it was memorizing my face. The man won't leave. 5 minutes passed, then 10. His car was still there. He wasn't moving. Just sitting in the driver's seat, staring at us through the window. Mel whispered, "He's not gonna leave." I grabbed the phone and dialed the police. They said they'd send someone out. But then, as if he knew, the man drove off. And when he passed under the streetlight, I saw there was no license plate, just deep scratch marks where it should have been. Mel called the cops. By the time the cops got there, the car was long gone. They took our statements, asked if we got a plate. We told them what we saw: the man, the teeth, the crow, and the thing in the back seat. They didn't believe us. But when they checked the drive-through window, they found something stuck in the ledge. One of the coins he had tried to pay with. The officer picked it up, turned it over in his hand. Then his face drained of color. He put it in an evidence bag, and without another word, they left. I quit shortly after Mel quit too. Richie. He stayed. Sometimes when I drive past Grady's Burgers at night, I see a rusted car sitting near the menu board. Not moving, just waiting. That image lives in my head. Story 3. Working nights in the ICU is something you never quite get used to. You learn to live with the constant beeping monitors, the eerie silence after a code, and the way the fluorescent lights never seem bright enough when you're alone in a room with a dying patient. People joke that hospitals are haunted, but you don't really take it seriously. Not at first. Not until you start hearing the stories. Not until it happens to you. The stories we tell. Every night shift nurse has a story. There's the one about the call button that keeps going off in room 14, even though no one has been in there for years. Or the figure in white that the security cameras catch standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., except when someone goes to check, no one's there. Then, there's the one that always made me shudder. The ICU baby. Nurses whispered about it during slow nights, exchanging nervous glances. They said sometimes, late at night, a baby would appear in the hall. Alone. Silent. Too young to walk, yet somehow, it moves. And if you see it, it means someone's about to die. I never believed it. Until the night I saw her myself. The hallway. It was around 2:30 a.m. The ICU was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. I was standing at the nurse's station, finishing up charting, when something caught my eye. Movement. Down at the end of the hall, near the entrance doors. At first I thought it was a shadow, maybe a reflection from one of the monitors. But then I saw it. A child, no more than a year old. Tiny. Barefoot. Wearing nothing but a thin white onesie. And she was walking, stumbling, right across the entrance hall. I froze. It didn't make sense. Children weren't allowed in the ICU. Too many infections, too much risk. And even if someone had snuck one in, where were her parents? I turned to my coworker, Lisa, beside me. She was staring too. And then, in a hushed, shocked voice, she blurted out, "That's a freaking baby in here." The words snapped me into motion. I rushed down the hall, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. She was heading toward the main doors. But when I reached them and looked around, she was gone. No baby, no parents, just the empty, dimly lit hallway stretching in both directions. My stomach twisted. I checked the doors. Locked. I checked the cameras. Nothing. Lisa caught up to me, her face pale. Where did she go? I didn't have an answer. And that's when we heard it. The death in room 9. A sharp, piercing alarm. A code blue. Room 9. We ran. The patient inside, a man in his 60s, stable just hours ago, was flatlining. We worked fast, pushing meds, starting compressions, trying everything. But it didn't matter. He was already gone. Pronounced dead at 2:37 a.m., the same moment we had seen the baby. Lisa refused to talk about it after that. I tried to brush it off too. Coincidence. It had to be. But the next time I heard someone whisper about the ICU baby, I didn't laugh. Because now I had a story too. Story 4. This story takes place at a small-sized church that I use to clean 2 to 3 times a month. One night, I was alone, sweeping the hallway outside the sanctuary. The only sound was the soft swish of my broom and the occasional drip of a leaky faucet in the restroom. Then, clear as day, music. Soft, slow notes floating down from the attic. I froze, gripping the broom tighter. It was the piano. At first, I thought maybe someone else was working late and decided to mess with me. But when I made my way up the narrow stairs, every step creaking under my weight, I found no one. The attic was empty. Dust floated in the air, disturbed only by my own breath. The piano sat there, lid slightly open, its keys still. Nothing had been touched. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe I imagined it. Then, bang! A violent, deafening crash echoed behind me. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs. The metal door, the one leading to the attic's storage closet. It shook, like something was inside. I took a step back, my skin crawling. I wasn't about to open that door. I turned and bolted down the attic stairs, leaving the lights on, the piano, the closet, all of it. Yeah, that happens. The next night, I asked one of the other workers about it. I expected them to laugh, to tell me I was crazy. Instead, they just shrugged. Oh yeah, they said, completely unfazed. Weird stuff happens here all the time. I asked if they had ever heard the piano. Their face darkened. Once, they told me. But when they went upstairs to check, they didn't just hear a bang. They heard whispering. I never cleaned alone again after that.